my name's Samuel Kasumu. I run a number of businesses. I guess first it'll probably be useful for me to tell you a bit about myself, and then we'll go into talking about emerging markets, emerging alternatives. So when I was 19 years old, I set up my first business in the UK. I'm now 28. When I was 23, I went to work in politics for a few years, and then I left again, and now I'm back involved in business. Currently, well, by summer, my organizations combined will be employing about 250 full-time staff. We are the sponsors of the Startup Quarter. So if you look up in blue, there's a sign that says sponsored by EN Campaigns. That's one of my organizations. So I'm very passionate about supporting small businesses and helping entrepreneurs to kick on in life. Now, as I mentioned, when I was 23 years old, I went to work in politics. I was advising a particular party around how they can broaden their appeal. And then I left. I left to do two things. One, to get back involved in business, because I'd left one of my businesses to another chief exec who is still in place now. But two, because I wanted to see the world. So I went all around the world to see how people were doing enterprise and entrepreneurship in those countries. I went to Angola, the third largest economy in Africa, and I saw how, as a country, they were promoting enterprise, but they had severe challenges because they're very reliant on oil. I went to Nigeria, of course, the most populous country in Africa. I went to Bangladesh. I saw how when I arrived at 1 a.m. they were still hustling and bustling, millions of people in the street. I went to Mexico, I went to America, Chicago, Washington, New York, Rome, etc., etc. And one thing dawned on me very quickly. The thing that dawned on me was that the world was evolving and that tomorrow's world will look very different. And as a country, Britain had to do more to engage with what we call emerging markets. Now, when you think emerging markets, Goldman Sachs in 2003 coined the term BRICS. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, and they said, well, these are the countries you have to engage with because these are the future champions of tomorrow's world. But then, the more I looked at it, the more I realized, yes, these are amazing economies, but actually there are a lot more countries doing a lot more interesting things. There are a lot more countries that we are struggling to engage with, that as a country we have to do more. And some people say, well, with those next group after the BRICS, we need to find the term, and they coined the term the next 11. So these are countries like Turkey, Egypt, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Nigeria, Pakistan, the Philippines. These are countries that maybe in Britain we neglect to engage with. Maybe in Britain we don't realize just how much potential there is to do business with these countries, and maybe we are missing a trick. So the reason why I'm here talking in Vote Leave Stand is because I believe, as a Brit, obviously of a Nigerian heritage, that Britain needs a better conversation with these economies. And I do not believe that being part of the European Union will allow us to do that. Primarily for one reason and one reason only. We cannot negotiate independently. We cannot have our own independent trade agreements. We are restricted. We cannot be creative. We cannot have any control over how we bring talent in from these countries. You know, Barclays at one point, we were doing some work with Barclays, and they said they had opened an 80,000 square foot office in New Delhi. And they had found that it was almost impossible for them to get the technical talent that they need to have those kind of offices in Britain. So they were forced to take their business abroad. For me, that's a problem. And this is the reasons why I feel like we need to consider leaving the European Union. Now, of course, when we consider vote and leave, I just spoke about the next 11 and the BRICS, but for most people, when they talk about, I guess, the international question, we kind of focus on the Commonwealth. And there are merits in doing that, because as you can see, the Commonwealth countries make up 26% of the world's population, a lot bigger than the European Union as a potential market. We can also see that the total gross domestic product for the Commonwealth countries are larger than that of the European Union. So already, forgetting talking about tomorrow's world, in today's world, we are already missing the trick. Whether we look at the BRICS, the next 11, or even the Commonwealth, flip that coin on any side, heads or tails, we are still losing being part of the European Union, in my humble opinion. Now, if we look at the present and the future GDP growth, we can see that Britain, yes, is already doing better than the European Union. But in tomorrow's world, things stay the way they are, if we remain in the European Union, we will be working at the same pace of growth as our European counterparts. And in the meantime, China, for example, will have GDP growth of 6.2%, which is very, very conservative. And the rest of the world, 3.4%. I mean, you just need to look at the numbers to understand that there is an argument to be made when it comes to whether or not Britain should remain in the European Union. In my humble opinion, more people need to hear about these facts, more people need to understand today's world, today's opportunities, but also the fact that tomorrow's world, heads or tails, we will lose if we stay in the European Union. No ifs, no buts. These are the facts. Just to continue with the fact that we are going to lag behind the current status quo, as you can see, GDP growth, amazing in countries like China, India, Japan. Germany, of course, we know are the captains of the football team of Europe. But Germany has a different conversation with Europe than what we have, and they always will. So we cannot compare ourselves to the Germans. We are a very different economy, our strengths are different, our USPs are different, and of course, as I say, they are the captains of Europe. They can stay there because this is an area where they lead. We are not in the European zone. We have very restrictive rights. Yes, we can vote, but that's as far as it goes. If whatever Germany says goes, whatever England says does not go. So as you can see very clearly, we have problems if we stay. Just a few case studies. Of course, it'll be very biased for me just to say, you know, you're always going to have a very rubbish business experience if you stay in Europe. We have a case study, a company called Kiln Flame Systems. They've done particularly well with their exporting within the European Union. They managed to secure 30% upfront payments, bank guarantees. So this is one of the companies that I guess if you're going to talk to UK Export Finance or the InCamp, they would say, well, this is one of our best case studies. These are the guys that show that you have to stay in Europe to do business. But my argument is these people would have still been successful within the European area even if we remained as part of the European Union. So yes, excellent, yes, trading in Europe, yes, doing well, but not necessarily because of the European Union. And then we have some very interesting, I guess, businesses that show what can be done if you trade outside of the four walls of Europe. This company called NMS International Group, they build hospitals in Ghana. In 2012, the firm won a £134 million contract to design, build and equip 7 district hospitals in Ghana. Fantastic opportunity. But you know what, if you travel to these countries, what you will find is that for every one Brit doing very well, there are 5 or 10 from China, from India, from Bangladesh, from America, because they're not restricted by the challenges of being part of the European Union. Another example within an emerging market is a company called JCP, based in Staffordshire, the world's 3rd largest manufacturer of construction equipment. They employ 11,000 people. Around 75% of JCP's business is overseas, and as an experienced exporter, the company always covers itself against risk. These companies, when you talk to them closely, they're doing well, but they could do better if it wasn't for restrictions around the European Union, but also because of the lack of resource invested in supporting businesses that want to trade abroad. I believe that we were not sending billions to Europe every single year. Some of that funding could be targeted into doing things like this, supporting businesses that are doing well. Or even comes in a business show. If you go around the corner, you'll see we have UKTI, very small exhibitors. I mean, I'm sure my company's budgets are not as big as UKTI's, but we've managed to sponsor a whole quarter. But of course, UKTI have restricted budgets, and they've had to let go hundreds of staff over the last 5 years. In my opinion, resources could be better allocated to supporting people that want to have international exports. And part of that will be that funding could come from not being part of the European Union. Here's another example. I guess I just want to end with a few facts. So the population of India is 1.252 billion. The population of Bangladesh, 156.6 million. The population of Nigeria, 173.6 million, depending on who you ask, or maybe closer to 200 million. These are countries with huge potential. These are countries that alone, one of them alone, if we had great relationships, we could probably do more business than we do across the whole European economic area. But we have challenges. We need to understand how to do businesses better with these countries. We need to not have gaffes like what the Prime Minister had a few days ago. And we need to have more events and activities like we're having today, where we support small businesses who want to consider doing business abroad. Most of the businesses that you will hear about doing international exports are huge, multi-million or multi-billion pound firms, the likes of Diageo. But I believe that small businesses also have a conversation to make with emerging economies. And for that reason, I kind of feel like, as an entrepreneur, I'm a bit of an idealist. I feel like, yes, it could be relatively safer to stay in Europe today. But to be honest with you, to stay in the EU for me poses greater risks in the future to our children when they have to compete in this global economy, in this global race, and there are restrictions. So I believe that safer today, perhaps, maybe there's an argument. Safer tomorrow, certainly not. More opportunities tomorrow, yes, but also more opportunities today. If we leave the European Union, still stay in Europe, still do business with Europe, but have a greater conversation with some of these amazing, dynamic, interesting, emerging economies. So I'll stop there, and I guess I'll open the floor up for any questions and comments.
Anybody got a question?
I am Kasumu from Business Zone. I just wondered to what extent you're operating, or your business is operating in Europe at the moment.
So we primarily work in emerging markets. So as I said, we've delivered some work with the Bangladeshi government. Strange as that may be, very interesting place to do business. We've also done work in Lagos in Nigeria. In fact, we released a report with Chatham House called, what was it called? Google my name, Chatham House, Lagos Enterprise, it'll come up. We did a huge report around how Britain can have a better relationship with the emerging economy of Nigeria, more particularly around the economic centre, which is Lagos. And then we've got offices in Angola, in Luanda. Luanda is the capital of Angola, where we help to support enterprise but also teaching English. So in Angola, you have a lot of barriers to entry. So for example, you need $1 million in the bank in Angola to do business there. Very strange place. But because of that, companies like the British Council struggle to deliver English language training. So we have offices there where we help to do that. So most of our businesses outside of England are in emerging economies.
Good question.
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk about the repercussions for Europe.
Yeah. That's a very good question. And whenever I hear people say this to me, I mean, I didn't wake up as a Eurosceptic, I must confess. I really had to think about this and say, well, really, which way are you going to vote? And when people say this to me, I say, well, would you bite your nose to spite your face? Are Germany going to stop sending Audis, BMWs? In Spain, are they going to prevent us from going on holiday there? Which will obviously mean that the economy suffers. Because also we are probably their biggest holiday destination partners or countries. They just cannot do that. So for me, as much as people say it's going to take years to agree on some form of trade agreement, I really believe that where there's a will, there's a way. And I believe that a lot of these economies in Europe, which to be honest with you, are not going anywhere too soon, will struggle if they don't have Britain for various reasons. So there will be a trade agreement with the European Union. It will happen sooner rather than later. And I believe that, in my humble opinion, it'll probably be very much business as usual with those who export in Europe. I can't see why it wouldn't, because we are not going to be the ones losing out primarily. It will be Europe as well. That's just my own personal opinion. I mean, if you look at some of these economies, you know, people always talk about Eastern Europe as a place where, you know, it's the bad place. It's the worst part of the European Union. The economies are not doing very well. But to be honest with you, go to Italy, go to Portugal, go to Spain, go to France. You're not going to find economies doing very well. These countries, they need a lot of support and a lot of help, and they need our business, so they will not go anywhere. because there's nowhere else for them to turn. So the impact will be minimal in my opinion because I cannot see an alternative. I just can't.
Any more questions? Thank you very much. That
Great.
was really interesting.
No problem.
We'll learn quite a lot from you. Oh, wait, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I came in late, so I don't know who was here. But,
Oh.
is anybody able to answer the question? Do you think we can renegotiate? Obviously, from a point of strength, this was exposed to I'm hoping that we can renegotiate. Obviously, renegotiate trade agreements, but these are announced because I don't want it to be you.
Yeah.
Which is where it's heading.
Yeah.
The other issues, it's all debated. Because I don't want political integration.
Yeah.
So do you think coming out of it, we can actually
Yeah.
influence?
Yeah.
That's my question.
Yeah. I think the most important thing to first consider is the fact that our Prime Minister, who at the time said he was willing to leave if he didn't get what he wanted, he went to Brussels, he was the best man for the job, and this is as good as it got. I don't think that Boris Johnson, I don't think that Michael Gove, I don't think that Tony Blair, I don't think that Ed Miliband, who's the leader of the Labour Party? Jeremy Corbyn, he's my local MP. Jeremy Corbyn, I didn't vote for him. Anyway, Jeremy Corbyn, I don't believe that any of them could have gotten a better deal than our Prime Minister. I think I think everyone would agree with that. And that's as good as it got. So therefore the alternative for us must be to be out of the European Union, but still have a strong economic relationship. We are still neighbours. We can still be polite. And I think that it is certainly possible for that to happen. Sure.
Our responsibility to the countries we're supposed to be helping develop into later on.
Our responsibilities to help in. Yes, he said, what about our responsibilities to countries who have just recently entered, or they may be entering in the future to support their development? Well, they're still our neighbours. We still have loads of Romanians, people from Poland, people from Bulgaria. In Britain, they are still here. You know, and if we left the European Union, there's not going to be like some kind of weird mass exodus of boats where they're all asked to leave tomorrow. There'll still be, I guess, according to EU law, they'll still be able to live here. You know, but the question is, what does the world look like tomorrow, and how does our relationship look? And I believe that Britain can still have a great relationship with all of Europe. And I think that when people talk about Europe and they talk about, as I said, France, France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Germany to an extent, but we'll push Germany to the side because they're in a bit of a league of their own. I think that people neglect the fact that these Eastern European countries are also emerging economies to an extent. So we can still have good relationships with them. Why not? Why not? We still have we have large populations of people from Romania and Bulgaria, etc. in Britain. Surely that should be a strength when we want to do business with them in the future. So I don't think we should neglect them. I don't think we will neglect them. That's why we have a Foreign and Commonwealth Office. That's why we have UKTI. That's why we have the Department of Business. Because we should be able to have independent relationships. Or sometimes unified relationships, but separate from, I guess, people being able to dictate how we decide. You know who I think should decide how we do business with the rest of the world? Voters, every 5 years. Or more, depending on what happens in the Palace of Westminster. Not some guys in Brussels.